Hello, I hope everybody's got their coffee or tea. This is John Barnwell here, and one of Hello, I hope everybody's got their coffee or tea. Here we go. This is John Barnwell here, and well, I guess I'm a bit of a Clyde crash cup myself. Okay. Once again, it's John Barnwell here, and one of our illuminating conversations. Here we have Reverend David William Parry from London over in the UK. And David, it's great to see you.
John, it's always a blast to see you, even though it's on a Sunday afternoon, and I'm rushing around between various church gigs. But, this makes my Sunday. It's always a pleasure talking to you. And this is a hot little show. It's very exciting.
Yeah, I think that the viewership is slowly growing. I mean, I've only decided to do regular podcasts recently. And so we're kind of counting on people that hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, all that, and share it out there so that we can gain a wider audience. And then there's more method in our madness. So I kind of put a little note out to you about C.S. Lewis the other day, and I thought that he's somewhat topical, even more than somewhat perhaps, because he was a leading figure in British culture during the war. He had his radio show. It was the biggest thing in England at that time, and he's finally they put a shrine to him in Westminster Abbey, which is putting him in there with Shakespeare and Dryden and all the greats of British literature, even though he's not famous for his verses, but his prose is beautifully written and so succinct that it questions others to meet the challenge that he met in coming to the conclusions that he did. One of the more interesting works of his is a book called The Abolition of Man. It's a book on education, and I think that today is truly relevant considering the utter disembowelment of education that's happened over the last 50 years. I mean, it's just anybody who knows anything about it, it's almost unrecognizable. Here in the U.S., we've had a couple of individuals that could be considered luminaries on this subject. There's Charlotte Thompson Iserbyt, who wrote The Dumbing Down of America, and there's John Taylor Gatto, who did a series of interviews for a YouTube channel called Tragedy and Hope. And I would highly recommend anybody out there that you look up these.
Welcome to the American Intelligence Media. I'm your host, Douglas Gabriel. I'm here with John Barnwell today, and we are going to be discussing one of the most important issues that you possibly ever discuss: human blood. And you might notice there's an obsession with it, with people who are wealthy and the elite, and going back in time, human sacrifice and every other imaginable thing.
I don't know how that's happening.
You can't put a bigger emphasis on it.
There, I had to throw it in the trash to get rid of that. It's that kind of a day. I don't know what to tell you, but it provides our viewing audience with the opportunity to laugh at me, and that's always a good thing.
Oh, never. If ever I do a show with Anthony Peake and something goes wrong, the sort of shorthand we have is the Archons are out to get us. But sometimes you think they actually are.
Well, they actually are. But anyways, I wanted to kind of give an overview a little bit of Charlotte Thompson Iserbyt. She's a freelance writer, and she was former senior policy advisor to the U.S. Department of Education back during Ronald Reagan. And when she was put in that position, she was in the Office of Educational Research and Improvement at the U.S. Department of Education. That was during the first term of President Reagan. If you remember, President Reagan was planning on eliminating the Department of Education, and to a large part that was due to the influence of Charlotte Thompson Iserbyt, because she started reviewing all the materials that had been coming out that were tied to the United Nations. She finally realized, geez, this is what we're sending out? Are you kidding me? And so consequently, she's really worked tirelessly, also in being kind of a whistleblower for the Skull and Bones Society, because her father and her grandfather were both members of Skull and Bones. But the deliberate dumbing down of America, chronological paper trail, it'll really change the way you look at education, and it's really timely today because I just happened to pull up the CAT report from American Intelligence Media, my associates Douglas and Tyler Gabriel over there, and that's the CAT report for today. So people can go to aimfortruth.org and they can take a look at some of their presentation on education and their advice toward homeschooling. And I think that that's become really a viable direction for people to go in, because education has become indoctrination. And but Catherine Iserbyt discovered while she was at the Department of Education, it was first published in 1999, and the original book contains 743 pages with documentation of these policies, conversation, and everything, right? And she also put out an 8 DVD CD set containing speeches and roundtables she did with some of the leading educators. And it's just absolutely bizarre what's going on. There's a speech on globally controlled classroom by Rosa Corey, author of Behind the Green Mask. And Corey spoke on the dangers of regionalism as a path to globalism in an attempt to replace local control and influence every aspect of our lives. So that's worth looking into. And The Soviets in the Classroom was published in '89, which is really an important text, in that it shows the actual documentation of agreements that were made between our government and the Soviet government regarding education, starting way back in the 30s. So then you can get back to basics reform, or OBE Skinnerian International Curriculum. B.F. Skinner's the behavioralist that thinks we're a bunch of meat skin animals. You know, it's like it's the worst of the sub-spiritual impulses that are interpenetrating our culture. And so that's why I got Reverend David here to talk about some of these things. I think that he has some genuine insights regarding the importance of spiritual culture and its utter lack and in modern education. And you happen to have made a remark the other day. You said that they're not teaching history, and I thought that's an interesting point, because those unaware of history are doomed to repeat it. So how are you, David, after my overlong soliloquy there?
I think that was remarkable. Wonderful reading. Where do I begin, apart from trying to hide these back windows? I remember reading a book years ago by Ivan Illich called Deschooling Society, a Catholic, as far as I remember, who, of course, wasn't talking about not educating people, but getting rid of the school system as an impediment to education. And I remember feeling at the time, gosh, I think he's hit something there. You know, what is education actually about, and what's it trying to achieve? Years later, I'll tell you a personal anecdote in a minute. Years later, I was invited to an open lecture with Professor Dawes at the University of London who said, with genuine insane glee in his eyes, we're all adopting the American model now. And you could see all he was thinking about was cash rolling in. And I remember whispering to the person next to me, the trouble with Professor Dawes is he thinks the cash is rolling in to his pocket and not the administrators. So he was proved to be crazy because, of course, he didn't get any extra cash. Oh, John, you said some amazing things. I mean, certainly in Britain. I mean, what are the things European countries do best? I mean, in fact, in France, it's fashion, it's sociology, it's the social sciences. In Germany, it's philosophy, it's theology. The hard stuff, engineering. What's Britain good at? Well, history and theatre. And there's a link there, if people think about it. There's a link culturally and aesthetically there. And the fact that history is no longer compulsory in British classrooms. I'm not one of these people that's against the absolute necessity of getting different streams in history, social history, cultural history, black history, decolonialization in history. I think actually they're all essential. What worries me isn't the specific, the specifics of history coming into the classroom. It's when history completely disappears from the classroom. And it is. I mean, for a while, it was an option in most British state schools. You could either do it or not. And people are telling me now, but it's disappearing altogether. There's not even the history, the history course there as an academic option. I'm going to set the cat amongst the pigeons and tell you a personal anecdote, which will have me down as a crazy. And I don't care anymore. I stopped believing in British education a very long time ago. I was actually a young cub at school, and we all saw a UFO in the sky in broad daylight. Now, I'm not saying what it is. That's the whole point of a UFO. You don't know what it is. So was it an alien spaceship? I don't know. It was a UFO. And of course, it was near Portsmouth Naval Base. So in those days, because I was a child, you didn't make that connection. All of these years later, you do. I do. But what depressed me is they've got this marvelous thing floating over a school playground, and some kids, I remember to this day, started crying. Obvious cowards. Some ran away to hide. The more robust amongst us went to get some teachers. I remember to this day, there's a UFO flying over this playground, and the woman saying, "I'm sorry, we're on our tea break," and we replied, "But this doesn't happen every day. There's a UFO flying over the playground. Don't you want to come and see it?" "No, we only get 2 designated breaks a day." And we all felt absolutely crushed. And when we got back into the classroom after playtime, the first thing she said was, "There'll be no discussions of UFOs in this classroom." And we're all getting back on with the set lessons. So I actually felt a body blow to British education from that time onwards. Oh, John, no, I mean, Hegel is the great European scholar that teaches us the necessity of knowing our history as an expansion of consciousness, as a way of grasping the beautiful, the true, and the good. And with him, it surfaces as a master science. Without it, we actually don't know what we're talking about because there are no contexts. There's no contextual chain wherein we're talking about topics. So it worries me a great deal when history goes missing. And of course, as the link would go, it was one of the things the Inklings at Oxford prized a great deal, particularly in their works of literature. I mean, I think I said before, Tolkien, you get the Lord of the Rings out of this sort of heavy Germanic Anglo-Saxon genre, which was Professor Tolkien's particular shtick. But with C.S. Lewis, you always got this sort of light-hearted, it's prose with air, it's prose with atmosphere, it's prose with a lightness of the touch that must come out of Middle English and the French influence on British English. I think I've been told by linguists the biggest influence on American English is actually Spanish, but of course the biggest influence on British English is actually French. It's not Spanish, and that comes out in the literature very, very clearly. And I love his work. I mean, I love the BBC broadcasts, which are still available, where he's sort of rallying the troops, picking up spirits. The British are in their doldrums. We've got to pick people up. And I love his sci-fi as much as I do the Narnia Chronicles. Who can't love The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe? The ultimate kids' fairy tale. You open the cupboard door and there's a bloody lion and there's a witch staring at you. What a wonderful piece of fairy tale. Fairy telling that is. But I mean, the power of the science fiction narratives, which he prided himself on as well, mustn't really be dismissed, because of course that's normally a way wherein writers examine the future and future possibilities. For me, I love fairy tales. I love the fantasy genre. But you're left with sort of a rebound there. It's something from the past to do with an archetypal realm that surrounds us all, and you can't really talk about the nitty-gritty and the human and what are we all going to do next. What are our lives going to be like in 100 years? What are our grandchildren going to actually experience? And that's where sci-fi really, for me, gets exciting. I remember, I'll stop reminiscing in a minute, John. I remember going to a lecture years back where a very eminent British occultist, I'm not sure I should say his name offhand, said he felt Americans were good at sci-fi because they have a short history. America as a state, as a nation, as a group of states has a short history. Therefore, it's entwined with the speculative enterprise of what comes next. Whereas Europeans were slaves to folklore, and it was something that really had roots here and would never allow real sci-fi to take place. Because I was sat listening, thinking, well, Jules Verne did pretty well. H.G. Wells is someone I'm pleased I read him, because you learn so much. And I think the trouble with modern sci-fi is it's all dystopian, which is okay. That's a perfectly acceptable genre too. That's a perfectly acceptable flow in the genre. But sci-fi is at its best, I think, when it's social and cultural speculation of the future and future possibilities. And for me, C.S. Lewis, particularly when he's talking about theology, apologetics, and he's drawing upon our lives in the here and now and where we go from here, that for me makes him an exemplary individual and unique in the Inklings. I think Tolkien draws on this vast reservoir of characters and situations and comparative linguistics. And certainly C.S. Lewis does that as well. But he's also tinkering with where do we all go from here and what comes next. And I think that's very, very exciting in the type of prose that he generates. Now, that's me having gone on for too long, John. I don't know. I apologize. I apologize. I got you back. There we are. I apologize. But, it's such an exciting issue, an exciting guy that you brought up for the discussion today. And it got me thinking over the last couple of days how grateful I've always been for his writings and his speculations. A great man. A great man.
Yeah, he's part of the warp and woof of English culture. But consequently, they're doing their best to try and suppress that. I mean, going back to the documentary that I sent you on C.S. Lewis, his biography, and right smack dab in the middle of it, one of the pundits that's talking about C.S. Lewis, they talked about how disturbed they were at Oxford because he was popularizing theology with his books, and they were bestsellers, and he wrote a ton of books, and he was doing the radio broadcasts, and he makes this point. He says, well, they hate Christianity. And it's like, I mean, that's a pretty, I mean, this is a very careful scholar, and here you have a guy like this making that kind of a statement. So that tells you the bed in which academia has been sleeping, that they cloak themselves in this image of science, but actually it's scientism. It's using science as a political tool, like they're doing right now. But that the issue of sci-fi is very interesting. It brings to mind some conversations I had with Timothy Leary, who I knew way back in the day.
Wow.
And first time we spoke to him on the phone, me and Robert from Mayflower Bookshop had him on the phone, and we're talking to him, and we say, yeah, we like to bring in spiritual teachers to lecture. Would you like to come in? And he said, I'm not spiritual, I'm scientific. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And so I took him to dinner when he finally did come to town. Somebody else brought him in, so we didn't have to. But I took him to Greek Town, and part of the conversation, we were there for hours and hours, eating Greek food and drinking fine Greek wine. And he started telling me, I asked him about what he liked to read, and he was a very concise person, and he was very honest. When he didn't know something, he would say he didn't know. But he said that whereas he was associated with Richard Alpert, who became Baba Ram Dass, right? Who's like the kind of pop guru of the 60s. I knew him also, and I did some.
Oh, wow.
We did poetry events, charity for this Siva Foundation he was involved in. 50 cents could save the sight of a child in Nepal. It just put some drops in his eyes, and he wouldn't go blind. So we thought, well, that's great. But Richard was different. He studied all kinds of scriptures and all that kind of stuff. But Leary says, no, I don't read much of that stuff. I like science fiction. And so it's not wise to underestimate the impact of science fiction on the consciousness of modern culture. But it's also been used as a tool to prepare people for what the elites think that they want to do with the world. But consequently, there's various streams in science fiction. And the one that influenced the Inklings directly was a book by a guy named Lindsay, Voyage to Arcturus. I have it here somewhere. I'd have to go dig it up. But it's remarkable. But the person who's considered to be the really original for fantasy literature is Lord Dunsany. And John Edward Morton Drax Plunkett. He's like a distant relation to my family over in Ireland.
Oh, wow.
Baron Dunsany. And but he wrote just a whole panoply of wonderful fantasy literature. And his grasp of language is so melodic, and the Irish writers have this kind of lyrical quality to their language. So you almost want to call it prosody rather than just prose. It's not dry and scholarly. If you go and you read William Butler Yeats, well, C.S. Lewis is actually Irish. I mean, he was born in Northern Ireland and then ended up. His father sent him after the death of his mother when he was 9 years old. Sent him to be tutored by that really was the one who laid the foundation for what C.S. Lewis ended up becoming, because he gave him an education in the classics and taught him Greek and Latin and all of the types of things that are the necessary tools to become an Oxford Don at that time. But that being said, in the state of education we're in today, it's really it's caused a great many people to start reconsidering their options. And as you say, history is such an important subject. In fact, Shakespeare based his histories on Holingshed, the Chronicles, And here's volume 6.
Wow. Yeah.
Chronicles. So this is the one that deals with Ireland. This is written by Richard Stanihurst. He was married to Janet Barnwell, his first wife, but they never had kids. So he's a distant relation too. So these are things that it's interesting and maybe perhaps not surprising that I'm interested in all this stuff. When I start digging around and I find out that these people are relatives. But when you get in certain circles, there's not that many people involved. So it's actually quite common. But in trying to grasp what is the point of certain approaches to science fiction, like for example, you have like 1984 could be considered science fiction, really. But what is it? It's like a description of kind of the game plan of the globalists, basically. Brave New World, written by another globalist, So you have Aldous Huxley and you have H.G. Wells. You have all these people that are basically minions of this whole neo-imperialist endeavor. And one of the easiest way to keep people down is to deny them education. We know that the British did that in Ireland. Ireland was always a seat of learning, and it said even simple farmers could read Latin and Greek. But the British, when they came in, they just destroyed the schools. They burned books. They did everything to push them into illiteracy. And so there's some really sordid aspect to history that leaves really a bad taste in one's mouth. And consequently, we need to try and see what our science future is. What is it? What is the science fiction of today? Where are we going?
No, 100% agree with you, John. I mean, and that's why we need to hold on to the histories of our nations, our tribes and our peoples, warts and all. Let me add an addendum to that, however. I think there's a very different atmosphere and spirit behind Anglo-Saxon education to what you find in the Celtic countries. I mean, certainly in the Celtic countries, Wales, Scotland, education is one of the marks of maturity. You become a full man or a woman, and because of your education, not simply because of your job and your social status. You can't help feeling that at least for the last couple of centuries, Anglo-Saxon education is actually purely and simply designed for the type of job that you get. If you don't get any qualifications at all, and then it's debatable about what these qualifications are and what their worth and value actually is in terms of education. Then you're a labourer. You do manual work. If you've got what they used to call O levels or GCSEs, then you can be trusted with cash handling, and working in a shop. If you've got what they used to call A levels, I think they're still going, then you can be a manager. But if you've got a degree, oh my God, then you can be a regional manager. Therefore, the attitude is completely different. I hope we don't get that from the Germans. I'm afraid we might do. If I ever go to Paris, I used to go to Paris a lot. The attitude to education over there was recognizable from the Celtic part of me. It's important because it's important. It's important because it's a human pursuit. There's something of the human spirit in being educated. Our educational system, partially at least, derives from the Germanic system, not the French system. We have huge linguistic input from the French, not academically. That comes from the German system. And over there, as here, you can't get to escape the feeling that the whole thing is absolutely functional. This is designed to fit you into a particular niche in society, and you will find it very difficult to struggle out of that afterwards if it all goes wrong. I confess to being a serial truant. When I was at my little country school, I thought the teachers were complete barbarians and used to take books of Roman poetry to nearby water meadows and learn things that way, which was much more healthy. Therefore, I can understand the whole impetus behind homeschooling as education collapses around us. And it became a political football in the 80s. British education, I think, probably was recognisable, even though it's, yes, a victim of the class system and one of the instruments of maintaining the class system. But it really wasn't a political football until the 80s and Margaret Thatcher comes along. And there were too many dons saying things that she didn't like. And all of a sudden, education becomes a political football. Since then, it's careered out of control. And, what was once a world standard, cheap way to get education, Britain was exemplary across the planet in those days for educational input and access, has become really marginalized and relative to other countries now and is descending beneath them. I mean, some Brazilian friends of mine who did PhDs here a couple of years ago would go into doctoral seminars and be absolutely gobsmacked at the level of ignorance they encountered amongst people doing PhDs. And I'd find myself, backing into a corner, apologising. Oh, it never used to be like that. It never used to be like that. But yeah, because there wasn't actually much else I could do. The trouble with Britain, to my mind, at the minute is it's resting on laurels that are themselves out of date. And we've really got to, oh my God, extended metaphors. We've really got to, take the bull by the horns, grasp our fate by the prickled nettles, and ask ourselves, where are we going with all this? I have a confession. I'm some sort of globalist, but not this type of globalization. Mine, I suppose, is a science fiction, sci-fi utopian view, that one day hands across the sea will extend everywhere and every nation and tribe will be brother to everybody else. It's a sort of Star Trek. What was it, Gene Roddenberry? I sort of got that view, I think. Mr. Spock getting out of a spaceship and everything being peaceful and calm. So that's the sort of sci-fi view I hope to maintain. Whereas this sort of globalization attacks education, aesthetics, philosophy. It uses politics to its own machinational ends at an almost psychotic level. And this sort of globalization is purely and simply the feudal system being reintroduced on a global level. And it's absolutely terrifying. Therefore, for me, one of the few bulwarks we have against that is education, real education. And of course, if it's real, then it's not simply about life experience and the mind, it's also about the spirit. And that does seem to be one of the very central things that modern educators simply don't want to discuss. I mean, if ever I'm talking to some of my atheist friends, I can't think of one of them that will say there isn't a spirituality in the human condition. Obviously, there's a big row about God, but I think that I can't remember a single time when anybody's ever said, that's irrelevant to being human. If anything, I find them quite spiritual people. Then the argument about metaphysics arises after that. But what makes me so suspicious of what's going on at the moment is what you said, of course, C.S. Lewis was known for, and that was taking these processes into a shamelessly authentic spiritual level. And that surely is where real education begins, and he's the exemplar of that in so many ways.
Yeah, that's very true. Earlier on, I mentioned a fascinating individual. He wrote a book, The Ultimate Tree Lesson. His name is John Taylor Gatto, and you can find a good 5 hours worth of interviews of him on Tragedy and Hope YouTube channel. But I gleaned from that, from his book, there's the 14 principles of an elite boarding school curriculum. And in there, see, John Taylor Gatto was really a leading educator. He got Teacher of the Year for New York City, Teacher of the Year for the state of New York. And he taught in Harlem, which is, an underprivileged area.
Wow.
I mean, it's classically a troubled neighborhood, the Black American classic neighborhood that's shown in so many movies. But he went in there and he was getting tremendous results with his students, and but he utilized these 14 principles that he had gleaned from studying the curriculum of the various elite schools, of which there's a small group of them, Ivy League schools, that the people that are the elites, they send their kids there because they're going to get a different education. They may be in the same university, but it's a college within the university that only certain people tend to go to. And they have an approach in education that even somebody who's working with homeschooling can utilize these principles. And mind you, Rudolf Steiner, the founder of Waldorf education, the most successful education system in the world, said that Waldorf education is meant to provide what children should be getting at home. And so it's a real lesson in responsibility for people that are truly going to be parents. But I'm going to run down some of these principles and we can discuss them as we go through them. The first one is that they have a theory of human nature as embodied in history, philosophy, theology, literature, and law. So they actually give you a framework of human culture to look at and analyze. And then there's the second principle is skill in the active literacies, writing and public speaking. Now, in elite schools, you have to turn in a paper every day. Okay, doesn't mean they're even going to look at it. Okay, but if they do, and you just muffed through it or you lifted it from somewhere else, you'll get in trouble. So they make them write a paper every day. At the end of the week, they have them present one of their papers before the classroom. Now that's a major skill that many people don't have is public speaking, and that's these two things: being able to put your ideas into writing to where you can communicate clearly to someone else, and then to be able to take that and present it before a group of people without getting embarrassed, actually developing a skill to where it's no big deal that you're in front of a group of people speaking. That's a real attribute. The third one is insight into the major institutional forms, how the courts, corporations, the military, education, the departments of government, the whole deal, so that they actually understand the world in which they live. Now, they used to have civics education here, but it's pretty much gone by the wayside. That's a tragic event because you have a lot of these young people, they don't even understand the beauty of the Constitution. They haven't studied the Constitution. They haven't studied the there's also the fourth principle is repeated exercises in the forms of good manners and politeness, based on the truth that politeness and civility are the foundation of all future relationships, alliances, and access to places that you might want to go to. So that they're learning it's kind of a finishing school. And you see, I see it every day out there in public. I see the lack of social skills of young people. They no longer have the grace of what it is to be polite, to be human. It's not run into very often. Then you move on to doing independent work, and he would give assignments. Like he gave an assignment to one of his students, his young black student, and he said, "Look, what I want you to do is I want you to get to the mayor and get him to do something." And try and get to the mayor, and then he said, even in your own little hamlet, And so that's a challenge. So the kid had to come up with a strategy and come up with tactics in order to be able to work through all of the barriers that might be in place. Reminds me of a story. A friend of mine, Ralph Marinelli, who I worked in, I was his editor, medical editor, in doing heart research, where we had proven that the heart is not a pump. And but before we got into that line of work, one time he came to me, he says, come on, Barnwell, I'm going to take you out to lunch. Now, he was one of the 3 directors of the Waldorf teacher training program. And he came to get me, and he said, I'm taking you to lunch because he had this invention that he did that was going to, for the auto industry. And he says, and I want to go talk to Henry Ford II, and I know that you know how to do that. And I said, it's very simple. I said, one of your best attributes, Ralph, is you have a great sense of humor. He said, so I would use that approach. And so he goes down to Ford headquarters here in Dearborn, Michigan, and he goes in and he walks in and he's walking down the hall and he sees Henry Ford II. And he walks up to him and he goes, want to hear a joke? Got past all the secretaries, everybody else. He said, yeah, sure, come on in. Brought him into his office, and he was able to sit down with him, tell his joke, and then present his idea to him, which now I see that it's implemented in autos all over the place. So, I mean, it's a fascinating skill to be able to do something like that. And of course, the 6th principle has to do with energetic physical sports, and that the development of psychomotor skills and all of that it's really academic to know that sports can really help develop your mind, and they also give you an ability to deal in a group and deal with pain and if emergencies come up and all of that. And of course, 7, we already covered the theory of access to any place and any person. Responsibility, that's a key. A personal code of standards and production behavior and morality. To have familiarity with and be at ease with the fine arts. That gives you fluence in culture. And the power of accurate observation and recording. To be able to draw pictures, to be able to recount events, to be able to look at something and then close your eyes and describe what you just saw. There's a certain awakening there. And of course, number 12 is the ability to deal with challenges of all sorts. 13 is a habit of caution and reasoning to conclusions. Don't get carried away. Don't look for closure. I keep saying that over and over and over again, but there's this whole process of learning to where you leave a door open because you're probably not working on complete information. And if you've finally finalized your thing and you've desiccated it into this dry stone where nothing can get in, it's going to be very difficult to try and dissolve it again and bring in some new ideas. So that's a key. And beyond that, the constant development and testing of prior judgments. You make judgments, you discriminate value, then you follow up and keep an eye on your predictions and see how far skewed or how consistent your predictions were. So that is in a thumbnail sketch. Some of the principles. And these are things that are very little taken to mind or heart in modern education. And for people that really would like to carry their education or their children's education, because it's not too late. I mean, there's people that have started very, very late in life. You know, it's like what Grandma Moses, she was like, what was she like? I think she was 70 years old when she started painting. You know. So, so that's a lot. I wanted to run down those things because I'd always wanted to do something on that because I thought it was such a treasure. But getting back to what's going on in the UK right now, do you have something you could share with us? Give us some insights.
None of those remarkable things are happening at the moment. Oh gosh, what's happening? You reminded me of two things with that wonderful view of Waldorf education, which of course is exemplary. I think the majority of all the best educated people I've ever met have been through the Waldorf system. There was an American kids sci-fi show, what was it, Roswell High, which apparently all these aliens were interbreeding with everybody. So half of the class was alien or some sort of hybrid. And I felt they'd been shortchanged. I mean, they had all these cultural treasures from other worlds, but there were still fights going on in the locker room. And they would still be given extra homework if they were late. So something was going wrong there. What's happening in the UK? Oh, my dear friend, that's a very good question. I mean, Boris Johnson, who simply hasn't lived up to the mark. I mean, certainly he saw himself as one of the great British prime ministers, has been left rather wanting, you can't help feel. The total mismanagement of the ongoing COVID-19 crisis, and we're not out of it yet, it's reaching almost epic proportions at the minute. Apart from the fact everybody's got to wear a face mask, how many months is this into the official crisis? Now everyone's got to wear a face mask, irrespective of public opinion. Oh, apart from the fact you don't have to if you've got respiratory problems. So, and now they're thinking of making everybody wear blue gloves. I mean, this is absolutely ridiculous. So it goes from bad to worse on that sort of level. And he looks more and more sheepish by the day. Good, resign, you fraud. Resign. What else is happening? So the summer's beginning. Schools that sort of are half back and half not back are now pondering their summer holidays and considering what they're going to do in the autumn term, and they're not really sure of how that's going to pan out yet. No, it's sort of, Britain normally is haphazard and chaotic, but this is beyond the pale. This is new territory for everybody, but not in terms of medical crisis, in terms of conformity. And, the fact that the economy is going to crash if things can, keep going on in this direction. I mean, the theatre side of what I do has been a write-off this year. There is no theatre space that's worth talking about. The venues want to charge full money, but only allow you a percentage of an audience. Well, no one's going to book for that. So most of those projects of my own I put into next year, I hear other people, impresarios, are doing the same. I hear TEDx Lambeth is being pushed into next year, which is something we all enjoy, and we're trying to stand against the stream of ignorance as far as that's possible. In terms of education, in terms of culture, it's in the hands of people like Stormzy at the minute. I don't know if you've heard of him. Young black singer, more power to your elbow. He's got a very good agent. If you can say something annoying, get Stormzy to say it. So Shakespeare is now a bad influence, for God's sake. Then he had a photograph of himself taken dressed as Shakespeare. And all the statues have to be pulled down and replaced with statues of either Madonna, oh please no, over their dead bodies, or Britney Spears. I mean, for God's sake, so. I do think there needs to be a discussion, an informed discussion over statues. I really do, for the simple reason most people weren't consulted when they were raised in the first place. And, instead of the old days when it used to be to a playwright or one of the muses, nowadays it's a captain of industry that gets a statue raised to them that's probably bled the local community dry along the way. So, no, we do need a discussion about civic monuments and where all that's going. But no. Education, the lack of it, John, is the staggering element here. I do a show with Alan Cox most Sunday mornings. We've actually finished with the autumn break. We finished this morning. Where, this subject comes up a lot, curiously. How do the British see themselves now compared to 50 years ago? And what does that bode for the future? I mean, you're looking at cultural treasures that are being thrown away, and they're being thrown away because there's no agreement. in what should be taught in a classroom and what should not. And now, of course, Britain basically has a government run by journalists and focus groups. The whole reaction. Apparently, Boris didn't want a lockdown in the first place. I think that's actually very complex, and we can go into all of that. But half the cabinet was saying you go into lockdown or we resign, for the simple reason loads of journalists were putting pressure on them to go into lockdown. I don't remember voting for them. I remember voting for democratically electable representatives. But that's the state of Britain at the moment, and they play on the fears of the uneducated. That's not being elitist. That's not me being elitist, particularly in the presence of a man who knew Timothy Leary. I'm so jealous over that. It's untrue. I would love to have met Timothy Leary, although he is responsible partially for my educational rebellion. I'm not saying whether I took acid, but certainly I dropped out. And it was a couple of years into that process when somebody said, "You do know he's Professor Leary, don't you?" And I thought, bugger, no, nobody told me that. I wish I'd have been informed on that. I'd have made different decisions. But oh no, think of it this way, John. At the level of rural British education, and let's just say things as modest as 20 to 30 years ago, they'd have drawn on local history, they'd have drawn on local folklore, the mechanisms of local government, and also this present obsession where everybody goes to denuded universities. That wasn't there. People without financial resources were encouraged into apprenticeships. In other words, the idea was you got the educational support that fitted your means. I mean, certainly the problem with that is that more modest means couldn't go to university, which was discouraged by the upper classes. But there were wonderful things like sixth form colleges. There were wonderful things like private schools, which would be sort of a safety net for people who could actually go to university using those means. And now all of that's been dismantled, and you get so-called community colleges, which are there for ideological reasons more than anything else. And what is taught, it's neither an apprenticeship nor is it academic. It seems to be a superficial glossing over topics that are better presented on Wikipedia than they are in these so-called new textbooks. So what's happening in Britain? The dismantlement of a civilization, of a whole society. That's what's happening. What worries me isn't it's not perfect here. It never was. So, is that good or bad? It's both. What worries me is what is going to replace it, because it seems to be the worst type of internationalist nightmare that they can possibly think of. Are all these people in government? They used to read in the Labour Party The Ragged Trousered Philanthropist by Robert Tressel. I know some of your viewers think I'm a socialist. I'm not. I'm actually a libertarian, but I think socialists raise some interesting issues sometimes. So I'm not. I'm a libertarian. But what they used to do in the old Labour Party was, as a rite of initiation, they'd give a copy of The Ragged Trousered Philanthropist, which is a seminal novel in the English language, talking about how the system actually works on a local level. An incredible book. And, to give people an insight into why they were in Westminster and what they were fighting for. Nothing like that would happen now in the new woke generation, where, only a few catchy buzz phrases appear to mean anything, and everyone can be sacrificed to this ideological goal. We'd have been dangerous and fundamentally ignorant times. I posted on Facebook recently, because as we all know, there were no black people of any prominence until recently. We all know that. So I posted a picture of Louis Armstrong, who's a musician that I admire no end. What old Sashmo, what an incredible performer. And Sammy Davis Jr. Yes, I know he was a member of the Church of Satan. Yes, I know. What was it, Jane Mansfield? Yes, I know she was too. So they got their exams wrong when it came to metaphysics. But what an incredible guy. And so, is there anything under the sun? No. So that's Britain.
Well, and truth be told, Sammy Davis Jr. did come to Jesus late in life, but he said he hung out with the Anton LaVey and his Church of Satan and all that because he met a lot of women there. That was a great way to meet babes, as he put it. So
I was horrified at the Church of Satan until a friend of mine, the anthropologist Richard Rudgley, said, "Did you know in the early days he was a part-time church organist and a lion tamer?" So all of a sudden it seemed a lot less wicked than I thought originally. Oh, John, have you seen that? There's an amazing photograph. It seems to be iconic of the '60s in America, where you get Anton LaVey raising the finger to his opposition. Oh God, I have to try and find it and send it to you. It was just hilarious. And that's the hippie time. That people misunderstand the hippies now. Because nowadays they're all dirty at music festivals. In the old day, Timothy Leary, John Lilly, everyone was looking for higher states of consciousness. It wasn't what it is now. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts on that were, John.
John Lilly's an interesting character who nobody ever talks about much anymore, but he's what's called a polymath. He had degrees in several different disciplines. And I never met him personally, although I did speak to his wife on the phone one time. And she was really a nice lady. We were looking into the possibility of setting up a center with the isolation tanks that he had, sensory deprivation tanks that he had invented. It's where it's a tank that's soundproofed, and you float in water. It's like salt water, so it has greater density, and you lay there in the dark, or so you can also pipe in cosmic music or what have you. But through sensory deprivation, it allows you to go more strongly into an inward state. And there was a lot of work done with that by John Lilly. And he's a very, very fascinating character. He's the one who pioneered communicating with dolphins. And,
oh, wow.
Yeah, he was a brilliant character. As far as Timothy Leary, I don't endorse. A lot of times, I have a very diverse history, and I'll talk about somebody like Tim Leary. That's not to be construed as any kind of endorsement. It's just he happens to be somebody that I knew. I know lots of people that I could talk about, whether or not I endorse them or not. I endorse Jesus Christ. I've always been disappointed when I endorse people, because as soon as I endorse somebody, seems they take a left turn somewhere and go off on something goofy. So I don't want to be responsible for that. But that being said, he's an interesting character, because early on there's films you could see of Leary where he's endorsing Aleister Crowley and "Do What Thou Wilt Shall Be the Whole of the Law" and all that. The early psychedelic days, he thought that's a great idea. Mind you, Leary's Catholic. He was raised Catholic. He's Irish. And East Coast Irish Catholic. So he's rebelling against the nuns. And that's very, very clear. Just as Crowley was rebelling against the Plymouth Brethren, which is an even more severe fundamentalist sect in England, the Low Church Party. But so these people, a lot of times when you see what people are doing, like you see some of these people out there with their orange hair and nose rings and all of that, and it's really obvious that they're still trying to piss their parents off. That's essential motivation. Or they're not particularly attractive because they didn't take care of themselves, and so they're rebelling against the boys that never hit on them in school. It's a lot of people acting out of their wounds, and rather than trying to find their strengths. And I think it's really an important lesson. And it's when you have to ask yourself, are you running from something or are you running toward? You know, are you like on a vision quest, or are you just running scared, right? And so consequently, that there's a big difference between the two of them, you know. And just this morning, I posted from the maxims of Ptahhotep, who he was a vizier way back in like 2350 BC in the fifth dynasty of Egypt. And but his text was discovered in 1847 by the French Egyptologist Monsieur Précy de Vienne. But in there, Ptahhotep is given advice, and he says, "Be not puffed up because of knowledge that thou hast acquired, and hold converse with the unlettered man as with the learned. For there is no obstacle to knowledge, and no handcraftsman hath attained to the limit of the knowledge of his art. If thou art in command of a company of men, deal with them after the best manner, and in such wise that thou thyself mayest not be reprehended. Law or justice or right is great and fixed and unchanging, and it hath not been moved since the time of Osiris. Terrify not men, or God will terrify thee." So what are they doing?
Wow.
They're terrifying men. They want to terrify everybody, and they're running out of. They don't have many arrows left in their quiver. And now they found, remember this lockdown thing. It was supposed to be until the curve flattens. So it's only going to be a few weeks. Now, how many months ago was that? You know, they go, oh, people actually do this. Let's keep doing it. Oh, maybe it has to be permanent. You know, because their ultimate goal is to get us into smart cities. They want to move everybody out of the countryside and get them into these smart cities, and then reduce the population, and ultimately the world will be like a giant theme park for the elites.
Oh, I mean, I'm not one to sing the praises of Alex Jones, but I'm not one to have a go at him either. I don't know what I think about Alex Jones. I think sometimes. Did you ever see the Justin Bieber rant? It was one of the funniest things I've ever seen on YouTube, because he just ends up screaming at the end where he can't take any more. Yeah, I mean, sadly, I can believe that sort of, what's that comic Judge Dredd scenario. Just because I'm not a conspiracy theorist myself, I'm not a conspiracy boy myself, it doesn't mean I don't think people don't conspire. I mean, elites conspire. That's human history. They remain elite because they're conspiring against other people. And I've heard that particular dystopia from many sources, including your good self. And sadly, I find that very, very believable. I find that very doable and believable. What a nightmarish world we'd all live in if anything like that ever does actually occur. I mean, one of Sly Stallone's worst movies, of course, when he actually was Judge Dredd. I thought that's going to be funny, because you've got this sort of the ultimate Hollywood meathead, playing a character with no character. So I thought that might be fun. And in the comics, I did have a look at the comics. I remember someone being arrested for throwing wrapping from a gum or something, a gummy bear, onto the road, and a robot walking up to him and saying you've been found guilty of something. You've got to spend a year in an ISO cube. And I remember thinking, oh, that's a bit severe. Why not a couple of weeks or something? But yeah, I can see that. I can see that happening. And why do human beings have to focus on the nightmarish in themselves? Why is it always got to be lower consciousness instead of higher consciousness? Why the nightmares of the id? And I'm into sort of Maslow and that sort of stuff. I'm into a Sagittary. For every basement in human consciousness, there's an attic somewhere. And that's where you get the Mozarts, where you get the great painters. That's where you get the the novelist. We've got to remember there's an attic in human nature as well. And if we climb up to the attic, that, of course, is where religious genius starts. And that's where the sort of creativity that reaches an exponential aleph eventually can be discovered. Therefore, it's no surprise to me, sadly, that we're looking at Judge Dredd future dystopias as opposed to this much more challenging grasp of what's higher inside us. Seek ye first the kingdom of heaven. It is within you. It is within you. From the very horse's mouth of our good and holy Lord. Where do we look for heaven inside us? And I'm absolutely certain he meant something like higher consciousness, where the angels are flying and singing to this day. Oh gosh, I learned to listen to conspiracy theorists, and I'm sure, like your good self, John, I've heard some absolute stinkers along the way. My God, I'm not sure I go for these lizards. I was a director producer for art at the People's Voice for a while. The People's Voice, of course, was David Icke's global, I think it was terrestrial, I can't quite remember, TV channel. I mean, credit where it's due, because it had nearly succeeded. It was just about to become the first global channel. And, so I started reading some of his books. I'm not sure I go for these lizards. I mean, as far as I know, either they're transgalactic or something with an attitude, or and they're their own breeders. That's trans-dimensional something or other. Too much trans all over the place. And apparently, the ones that are here, they're all about 9 foot tall or something, and they're muscle-bound warriors, just waiting for the time when they can all rush out of inner Earth caves and slaughter us all in our beds. So I'm not sure. I'm not really sure I go for that. I mean, surely someone would have discovered them by now. But some of the theories, well, yeah. Oh no, do you believe in lizard people, John?
I believe in lizard people. I try to believe in people, but that's even hard.
That's hard.
I think that I admire David Icke for his sincerity. He was, for example, capable of revising his views on Judaism, for example. Whereas, if you remember, a time ago, he was blaming everything on them until he started to receive the information regarding the Sabbateans, Sabtai Tzvi, and Jakob Frank. And now he goes and he understands that that's what he was actually talking about. He just didn't know enough history to realize that the Sabbateans are not, you can't consider them Jews, seeing as how they were excommunicated from Judaism, a couple hundred years ago or so. Even in fact earlier than that. So consequently, it's easy for people to want to get closure, come to conclusion, and go, aha, I figured it out. So everybody, the problem in conspiracy theories is people, they haven't been at it long enough, and they don't have enough information, either fortunately or unfortunately. For me, depending on how one looks at it, I've been dealing with this stuff for 45 years. And I've known personally authors that contributed to the literature on the subject and been exposed to a great deal more than most of these people. Most of them, it's something that they picked up sketching around YouTube and Wikipedia over the last few years. And so they're not qualified to deal with the subject matter, really. But they are building a career in doing YouTube videos, what have you. Consequently, there's a lot of rabbit holes you could jump down that are not worth the time, and a lot of simplistic evaluations of subjects that are they're far beneath the reality. I mean, one of the best examples is the way in which people are assessing the role of the Knights Templar in the history of all of this, because they like to tie them in with this whole globalism thing that's going on, that it started with them and that they're devil worshippers or some crazy stuff like that, which came, that the initial thing about the Freemasons being devil worshippers was a result of a Jesuit forgery, back in the 1800s. We know that. I mean, we did a show on that. Leo and I did a show on that a while ago. But the Knights Templar were key, and in fact, that's one of the key issues. That's one of the reasons I wrote my first book, The Arcana of the Grail Angel, because there was so much nonsense coming out since Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and it became a cottage industry. And everybody and his brother was writing a book on the real secret of the Templars, and they just didn't have enough depth of knowledge to be able to get behind what was really going on. And as you being a student of Rudolf Steiner, you know that at the core of Rudolf Steiner's work, that's the core material, the Knights Templar and the Grail. I mean, in his main cosmological work, the Outline of Esoteric Science used to be called Outline of Occult Science, or various other titles they shifted around. In that book itself, he says, were this book to be given another name, it would be called the Holy Grail. So you see that that's a central mystery that Rudolf Steiner is dealing with, is that particular stream of Johannine Christianity that brings a reconciliation between the streams of Cain and Abel, between the bifurcation that is that divisive force that happens and has been so damaging to culture. And he makes the point, as far as education is concerned, is one of the great failings of education is that they try to give children ideas that they understand right away. And he says, when you do, you're bankrupting the child later in life. It's important to give children ideas that they don't understand, so that later in life they can look back and say, aha, so that's what he or she meant. See, and it becomes a thematic developmental process that's open-ended. And so consequently, you see so much of what's presented in childhood education centers around legends, fairy tales, myths, and all of that, because there's an encoding within these myths, legends, and fairy tales that have to do with the development of the human being that are critically important. It's the literal fabric of culture. And when you demythologize culture, when you try to make it just this literalism in the most simplest terms, say, well, we want it so everybody can understand it. You're dumbing it down. You're by like what did Bush come up with? No child left behind. Basically, let's not worry about educating anybody. Give everybody passing grades. And so you get a participation award. You don't win the championship. You get a participation award because we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. So there's this general war, there's a cultural war going on, and the basis of this spiritual history, Rudolf Steiner talked about the materialism that came to birth, so to speak, in the 1840s, specifically in England. And that there was actually a war in heaven that culminated in 1879 with the Michaelic forces defeating the Ahrimanic forces of materialism. This caused the Ahrimanic forces to fall to earth. And now they attempt to gain access to their development through linking into the human intellect. So there's your lizards. It's the Ahrimanic beings that. But David Icke doesn't know what I just said, so he could see that somebody's being inspired by an Ahrimanic being and think that that person's a lizard. Oh, they're a lizard, because apparently David has clairvoyant experiences, and he's done experiences with ayahuasca and all this different stuff. I don't know all of those details. I'd love to talk to him sometime. I think I could help share with him certain insights that will kind of flesh out what he's working on, because he's doing some really important stuff. And you got a guy who fills soccer stadiums with audiences. I mean, they blocked him from going to Australia because he's too influential. But he needs to fine tune what he's doing, and he's actively working on it. And I could have helped him with his arthritis too. It's unfortunate what's happening. His hands
Gosh, I get rheumatism. We need to talk about that as well. I get bad rheumatism. I never think of you.
Look up the videos of Dr. Robert Morse, M-O-R-S-E, and it's about reconditioning your lymphatic system so that it's the acidification of the lymphatic system that leads to degenerative conditions. I'll just leave it at that. You can go look it up.
Oh, I shall look that up. Thank you, John.
Yeah, he's a fascinating character.
Oh, I mean, God, these conversations could go on and on and on. I mean, I never think of you. Well, we have a good old chinwag. I mean, I never think of you as a conspiracy theorist. I think you comment on conspiracies. I think there's a vast difference between those things, and I think you're incredibly knowledgeable about hidden aspects of history and society. I never think of you in those terms, curiously. I do think having said that, I do think some conspiracy theorists have a strong point, and some conspiracy theories are actually interesting. I think you're head and shoulders above all that sort of stuff. Oh, wow. I shall have a look at that too. Gosh, wow.
Yeah.
I'll
there is a method that the elites use to try and stay in power, and that's what we talk about. And that is a conspiracy. It's not a theory. The term conspiracy theory was created by the CIA to discredit people that were trying to look under the hood to see what's going on. So let's be clear. The work that we do at American Intelligence Media and American for Innovation, the documents are posted. We have government documents. We have documents from stock purchases and ownership and all. These are not things. We don't make stuff up. We take material that we find, and we try to do a good job in presenting our findings. And so you can't call it conspiracy theory. That's a misnomer.
Oh no, you're a very clear cultural commentator, and I know you always post the documents. That's why I'd never ever consider you in that bracket. And I think the CAT enterprise is incredibly important at a time of increasing social pressure and darkness. I mean, it's hard to underestimate the contribution you're making currently, and that's not simply because you're my mate and I'm on your show. It is because I think more outlets like that need to surface. It's doing an invaluable job. Also, if you're interested, I'll put the word out and see if it reaches David Icke. I'm not sure I've got any direct access. I'm not sure I ever did if it comes down to it, but certainly I know people who do have direct access. So we'll see if they're still in contact with David Icke. I mean, what a very mixed phenomenon. I remember going to a place called the Brixton Academy when he first started in the 90s. I'm trying desperately to sit here and think of the actual date, with a journalist friend of mine. Now, the Brixton Academy isn't the size of the O2 Arena. The O2 Arena is gigantic. And of course, David Icke nowadays sells out places like the O2 Arena. But it doesn't mean the Brixton Academy is small. It's this massive pop concert venue And I remember the day I went with my journalist. Journalists are always late for everything. So we arrived late. I'd missed the talk on black magic that I wanted to hear. We arrived in time to hear David Icke's view of international politics, which was actually very, very good. And it just stunned me. There were people queuing 2 or 3 abreast around the block to try and get into an auditorium that had standing room only, and there wasn't much standing room. We'd booked our seats. Security was going mad because literally the aisles, which of course must be free for health and safety reasons, were chock-a-block with people. And he was a good turn, as they say in British theatre. You know, what he'd do is he'd be on for a couple of hours, then there'd be a break, and he'd be on again. I mean, it was £50 a ticket back in those days, which was a lot of money and worth every penny. And no, he's a very mixed bag. I think the trouble with him, you know, if you're looking back, do you remember the interview he did on the Terry Wogan show, John, which sort of launched him?
Yeah, I remember that was the original. That was the one that really shocked everybody. Really, I mean, you know, he just all of a sudden started coming out with all this stuff. It was like, and he was a major sports presenter for the BBC, you know, and a soccer star. Was he goalie or you know?
Yeah, goalie.
Yeah, goalie's like, you know, that's the end all in soccer. You don't have a good
safe. You have to be a safe pair of hands if you're a goalie. So obviously he was considered a safe pair of hands. Oh, I thought Terry Wogan, who, you know, Britain's favourite chat show host, may the angels rest him. I believe he's gone to glory. Was uncharacteristically nasty to David Icke. I mean, you know, listening to the grapevine, what seems to have happened was he'd actually had a spiritual experience, and it just completely knocked the stuffing out of him. It wasn't anything he was expecting, a genuine spiritual experience, and he didn't know how to handle it. And I felt Wogan, I don't know, I just felt he was unfair. I mean, the remark I remember to this day, there's a Freudian slip, to this day, is where he turns around to David Icke and says the audience isn't laughing with you, it's laughing at you. And I thought, my God, that's Britain's favourite TV host, and he's never like that with anybody. Yeah. It was just a strange encounter all round.
Well, that's the challenge, is that materialism is smug, you know, and all the people that think that we were walking around in meat suits, and that they have some kind of crude notion that ideas are a result of some kind of chemical activity in the brain. You know, there's very little hope for those people, because at some point it's up to them. They have to come to the dance. You know, you can't talk them down from this thing, because by the very nature of materialism, it says that you will only allow yourself to entertain certain types of ideas, and so consequently, it's very labor intensive to try and get through to those people. We're getting near the end, and I want to make sure that we give a notice to anybody that's watching about David's wonderful book, Athos Inside Me, Essays on Religion, Swedenborg and the Arts. It's David William Parry. That's available on Amazon. And there's a link beneath the video that you can get to it from. And there's also my own personal works, The Arcana of the Grail Angel, The Spiritual Science of the Holy Blood and of the Holy Grail, a study developed out of the work of Rudolf Steiner of the underground streams of esoteric Christianity, which flowed from the Brotherhood of the Holy Grail to the Order of the Knights Templar and the True Rosicrucian Order. And then there's the sequel to that, which is really more of a meditative tool, The Arcana of Light on the Path. And this has to do with Mabel Collins' Light on the Path, and it has a 22-fold structure that I show. It's parallels to the trumps of the tarot. And the Mabel Collins Light on the Path was the original guide that Rudolf Steiner used when he first became head of the esoteric section of the Theosophical Society in Germany, before he broke away and founded the Anthroposophical Society. So it's just one of the most, one of the deepest thought-provoking texts that I know of, and I thought that it shouldn't be forgotten because it does speak right to the core of what it means to be human, and so consequently, it's invaluable. And also, you can share with us through if you want to buy us a cup of coffee. There's paypal.me/John Barnwell 888, and then David, your PayPal is paypal.me/D Parry, is it?
I think so. I'm terribly bad at these things, but I think so. Yeah.
Yeah,
come on, John, you should know now. I'm Britain's favourite technophobe.
It's beneath the video. If somebody wants to buy him a cup of coffee, it's beneath the video. And I always I feel invigorated after I have these little chats with Reverend David. So, and I want to ensure that everybody has a good experience from this. Could you consecrate this moment with a short prayer before we depart?
I'd be honored. My friends, my family, let's call to mind the great need for healing in our world at the moment. The type of healing that leads to the resolution of conflicts both inside and with outside each human soul. And may we remember, along with the gospel taught by our good Lord Jesus Christ, we need to know the truth, because it's only the truth that will set us free. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you so much. And I guess somebody's asking, yeah, I guess I didn't say, but you can go on eBay. You'll find my books on eBay. Don't look on Amazon because people are overpricing them there. David's books are available on Amazon, and my books are available on eBay. So, David, thank you so much, and I hope to see you again next Sunday.
Always a pleasure, John, and I look forward to it.
Okay. Have a good day, sir.
And you, my friend.